Welcome to our next episode of the Intrepid Hunter with Nathan Little. And in this episode, we are after moose in Norway. Welcome, Nathan. Tell me how you decided on Norway and why moose.
So Norway first came on my radar primarily because of salmon fishing. Norway was always on my sort of bucket list to go and visit because I've heard, one, it's such a beautiful country, which I now found out for myself, but also because it had the mighty Alta River, which for people that don't salmon fish, and up until I started salmon fishing, I never knew about, is the sort of the holy grail of salmon fishing. So as a result, Norway was always on my radar for that reason. It's a place where you have big salmon. It's the place where dreams come true for a fishing perspective. So from that, and learning that getting to fish the Alta was nigh and impossible, I started to have a look at ways and means of going to Norway and fishing places and discovering rivers there, because there are so many amazing rivers in that country. So as a result, it was actually over dinner one day. I was up in the Highlands visiting a friend, a bit of a stalking and shooting trip. And he said he had some communication with an estate out there that had some amazing fishing. Immediately, I was sort of like a kid in a sweet shop going, yeah, okay, let's have a look at that. Let's just go for it. One thing led to another and nothing really happened. Again, going back, and during lockdown, I was sat looking for things to do and a bit bored. And then the whole Norway thing sort of re-sparked again, because I just got into my salmon fishing in a much bigger way than I ever anticipated. And I remembered this place that I was told about, where they had this huge estate and hunting, shooting, fishing as well there. So I got in touch with them initially on a fishing basis. To go out there and fish and see what was available. And after a bit of communication, initially through Facebook, I spoke with the estate manager, Chris, and he messaged back and we started a bit of dialogue. And we arranged a Zoom call just to sort of have a bit of a face-to-face and have a bit of a conversation about what was available. And during this sort of hour and a half long conversation with him, it transpired that actually the fishing was just one element of what the estate had to offer. And it's the largest privately owned estate in Norway. It's 75,000 hectares. And I think, or in acres, I think it works out about 175,000 acres. So it's a colossal estate. And over the course of this hour and a half, we realized that he actually is mostly a hunter. So we started to discuss, all of a sudden I'm starting to hear him say moose hunting, and they refer to it as wing shooting over there, which is quite a sort of more universal term, whereas in the UK we say sort of game shooting, and we don't really call it wing shooting. But then he starts to explain that he's got all these different species of birds that we can go and hunt and things like that. So all of a sudden this trip to Norway goes from fishing orientated to me going out there and exploring it from a hunting perspective. We'd planned it for sort of 4 or 5 months beforehand, maybe even a little bit longer, that I was going to go out and experience a moose hunt with him as a client. And I did say to him, I said, look, I want to experience everything about what you do, how you would normally do it. Don't shield me from all the blood and guts and the nitty gritty of, make it as real as possible. Skip forward this period now where I'm coming to fly, and bearing in mind this is 2021 that we did this. Now, for those that have listened to the Kyrgyzstan one, Kyrgyzstan was my first trip abroad where I was actually traveling with a rifle, and going through the whole experience. In 21, when I flew out to Norway to hunt with Chris, I was using an estate rifle, so it was a lot easier, but it was still the big sort of leap from leaving the UK and going into Norway. I actually remember it specifically because I booked it so that I was hunting on my 30th birthday, because I was trying to decide what to do. Do I have a big party? Do I go out and get drunk? Well, I do that enough. And I wanted to do something totally different. It was the first sort of year of hunting without my dad type thing. So I wanted to do something really special. And moose hunting was the first foray.
In terms of kit, what did you take out with you? Because I mean, at that time of year, what's the climate like in Norway?
At that time of year, I was expecting it to be really cold, wet. Everything is, really quite bleak. But actually, it wasn't that bad at all. It was like a sort of mid-September, late September in Scotland, up in the Highlands. So you do get a bit of rain and a bit of wind, but it wasn't Baltic cold. It was a very pleasant climate to actually hunt in. I had my smocks, I had layers, and Christopher was explaining to me, because as I say, this was the first hunt, he explained the layering system to me really well, and the importance of, even though it might not be freezing cold, the importance of layers, which I, up until that point, had never needed to understand before, because I'd never hunted in this capacity. And he was explaining that we were going to be hunting slightly uniquely, in the sense of it was going to be more of a mountain hunt, whereas hunting with baying dogs or other means of hunting for moose in Norway is more common, whereas mountain hunts are a little bit sort of more out of the ordinary. So a layering system was really important, so that we could remove layers when we're hiking, and we can put layers on when we're sitting and glassing, and that became really clear, and I understood that quite quickly, and I actually felt the benefit of it doing it. So in terms of everything, like the weather, I was advised really to pack like a sort of autumnal trip in Scotland.
Wow, and that's kind of completely, I guess when most people think of Norway, you just think of Northern Lights and it being really cold. But that's a really good insight into, I guess, talking to the people that are arranging the trip or the experience, to get the key information from them before you go. And in terms of kit such as scopes, binoculars, rifles, what did you take your own, or did you rely on the estate when you got out there?
In the first instance, as I said, the first trip that we did to Norway, I did have some of my own kit. I had my loopholed binos and a couple of other bits, but it was actually very much reliant on the estate. The estate supported me hugely with it. I took little bits that I thought would help, and it's always nice to have your own binos rather than rely on somebody else. Estate rifles, I thought, are slightly different because they're there for that purpose, but certain things you just want to have your own. But it was plan in advance, as with all these trips, particularly as we said with the Kyrgyzstan one, to plan in advance and to discuss this, and particularly if you've never done it before. But that's why it was really good in this first trip happened. It was really good to sort of go with an operation where they cater for that and where they offer that. Even though it is an absolute raw, real experience, there's still a professional operation that still provide that service for people that want to do it to whatever level.
So what was the journey like leaving? Where did you fly from in the UK? Where did you go into? How did you get there? I mean, was it epic or was it fairly easy to do?
It was really, really straightforward for Norway. I mean, this time, the first instance, I didn't have the rifle, so I didn't have to sort of go and declare that I was carrying guns like I did, the time after. It was really straightforward. I was really quite worried, because it was a time when people were allowed to be traveling again the traveling was starting to pick up, so queues were getting a little bit busy, and the stress of traveling on your own with all your kit was always a bit sort of worrying. And previously I'd heard some horror stories about kit getting lost, and when you're only there, I was only there, and the plan was only to be there for sort of 4 or 5 days. So then you panic to think, well, if you lose an item of luggage, you really need that with you, and losing something even for a short period almost renders it completely useless, because the chance of it getting to you in time is pretty slim. So I flew from Manchester to Trondheim, which Trondheim's a really nice airport, very straightforward to get to from Manchester. I did go via Amsterdam, and I flew with KLM, and obviously because of where they're based, they rerouted through Amsterdam. Really simple, straight through the airport. Get to Trondheim, and I'm staying overnight. I've booked a hotel at the airport hotel to because I've got a connecting flight the following day, and it was sort of one of those sort of small shuttle flights. Get to the airport only to find that my sleeping bag hadn't arrived. Now, the sleeping bag in this instance was going to be quite important and quite significant, for the simple reason that we could have been camping out, or the cabin that we were going to be staying in. You need a sleeping bag with you. You know, not everything on that estate, on an estate that size, is logistically simple for the estate to kit out. So they can't necessarily get bedding and linens and things like that, because it's not that kind of hunt or trip. So I was quite annoyed and quite stressed that certain bits of kit hadn't arrived, because I'd had some sort of more thermal socks in with the sleeping bag and other bits like that. Speaking with Christopher at the estate, he said, "Don't worry about it." And for a first time foray, it was really important to go with a proper outfit, not outfitter. He was just really quick to switch a plan, find an alternate cabin for us where he could get things to there much simpler. And actually, I didn't need a sleeping bag, and I could pick up other things from the shop before we went on. So problem solved. The next day, I flew from Trondheim to Rorvik, which is about a 45-minute flight, or about 4 hours in the 4 hours drive from Trondheim. So I knew which one was the easiest option. I was greeted by Christopher, first time we'd met in person, and from that moment on, it was just sort of proper adventure, because we're driving to the estate. We needed to pick up a few things on the way, and driving to the cabin, and I just got a really good vibe from him straight away that I knew this was going to be an epic trip.
What was the terrain like? So, I mean, you land somewhere random in Norway, get bundled into a car. What are you seeing as you drive towards the estate?
Well, when we were flying in, I mean, flew into Trondheim, it was hilly, it was beautiful. You know, you could see some bits of farmland and beautiful huge fjords. When I got on the flight to Rorvik, that was a total different story. I mean, you could see a lot more hills, but we were coming in on this really, really choppy flight, and it was petrifying, because it was this tiny little plane going over really choppy seas. And by the time we'd landed, I mean, you could hear people screaming as the turbulence was hitting. It wasn't nice. When we got in the car and we were driving through, you're just seeing these huge sort of mountain areas, just absolutely stunning, all sort of, you know, with fjords at the bottom of them. And, you know, we were driving along the coast at some point, and then we'd go inland and you'd see rivers. It was such a dramatic change of scenery, and it is such a stunning country. And it's as a result, it's why I go back. I've been back twice in the last I went twice last year. I'm going back certainly twice this year, and because it's just so lovely, and the people there are amazing. I've realised, I don't know whether it's just Christopher and Anders, my two friends now over there, whether it's just their dark sense of humour, but the Norwegians I found have a very, very sarcastic sense of humour, which I just love. It's hilarious. It was just a beautiful spot, and I knew full well that it was going to be a good trip. So as we were driving through, we'd get to the little town where Christopher lived, and these towns are so far away from everywhere, because Norway, when you look at it on a map, is so long. It's such a long country. You know, it's just all these lovely little communities, and there's just so much going on in them. And from there, we loaded up a few bits. I think we had to pick up the quad bike from the estate office, and then we drove through some more mountains, and it took us about 40 minutes to get to the sort of the gravel track that would then take us to where the cabin is, where we're going to stay. The cabin, from the main road to the cabin, is a half an hour drive down a gravel track. That's how sort of remote. I think it's about 14 kilometers. But obviously you have to drive slow because it's not necessarily the most tarmac road. But then all of a sudden, all phone signal goes. You've got no communication with the outside. So for many people, it's perfect. For me, social media addict, communication addict here, it's a bit worrying. And then all of a sudden, after sort of half an hour down this track, you just open up into this sort of valley with the most stunning and so cool cabins. And that was where we were staying for the duration of the trip.
Oh wow, that it just sounds amazing. It sounds like something out of a fairy tale. In terms of cabins, I guess most people will imagine a cabin and think of something probably, wooden logs, Ernest Hemingway, American style cabins. What stuck with you about the way that the Norwegian ones were designed?
It was exactly like that. That was the pleasant surprise because I was expecting something a little bit more, I'd say modern, but I wasn't expecting the cliche cabin, and I was hoping for a cliche cabin, but I wasn't expecting it. And it was just awesome. It had all the mossed roof for sort of the insulation. It had the classic sort of decking. You're expecting to see somebody there on a rocking chair outside smoking, and just very, very quaint. And it had the big wood store next to it for all the logs. And then it had, I realised it's very Scandinavian, it had another sort of smaller cabin, hut, which was the toilet and the shower, but it also had a sauna, a steam room in there as well, like a sauna, which I haven't used yet, but I'll do it this time when I go back.
How was it all powered? Was it someone in there putting kind of logs on the fire for you, or?
Well, it was, so when we got there, Anders is a friend of Christopher, who's now also a really good friend of mine, and he was there helping out. And because I was there in the capacity of a client, the pair of them sort of were there working around the site and helping me out and looking after me. But it does have solar panels on there. It has, I think they have a generator in one of the huts, but it's really well self-contained. And what I've learned about the cabins, particularly on that estate, and I think it's quite common across Norway, is they're really well established. They've got great provisions. They really do know how to make a proper cabin in the woods. And we had electricity in there. We had a lovely fire. We had hot water with the showers, which was a real luxury, particularly how remote we actually were. The actual main cabin had a really, really nice kitchen area, dining area, some sofas. The bedrooms were fantastic. Norwegian bunk beds are so comfy. I've experienced 2 different sets now, so it's quite consistent across the board, but they're so comfortable. It was just the perfect, most idyllic setting and start to what would essentially be probably the most grueling hunting experience I've had to date.
So how did they prepare you for what lay ahead? You get there, you've got this picturesque cabin, which is everything you could have imagined it would be. What are they feeding you? Is it fish? Is it meat?
The boys have now tell me they planned this in advance, and when I got there, the nice thing about the setup that they'd arranged was that we had such a really good. They'd done a really good shop, and they'd got plenty of food in, plenty to eat and drink, and it was just perfect. I sit down on the first sort of evening because we weren't hunting the first day, and Chris calls me over to the table, and there's this sliced ham. It looks lovely, and it's got some sort of creme fraiche or cream cheese. I think it was creme fraiche next to it, and like little sort of flat, almost like a flatbread type thing, but little tiny pieces of it. So that both Chris and Anders are eating this and talking. We're having a gin and tonic or something like that. I can't remember what it was. And I'm eating, and I'm thinking, this taste, it's nice. It definitely ain't ham. And the pair of them are laughing, and I'm saying, "What's this?" And they go, "It's moose tongue," but they keep such a straight face. And I'm thinking, right, I'm not going to be rude because I've only just met these guys. I'll eat it. And I'm thinking, but I've never eaten anything like this before. Lo and behold, 2 or 3 gin and tonics in, I'm still munching on moose tongue. It was really, really nice. And I don't know whether or not that's just because I'd had a little bit too much to drink and I was knackered, or look, it was very nice. And when in Rome, as they say, or when in Norway. So that was the starter. And from then we just had really nice hearty food, because the guys knew what was going to be ahead, and they wanted to sort of keep me up, but keep energy levels up and prepare me for what was to come. So there was plenty of good food, sort of stews, and we ended up having moose steaks, and there was quite a variety, but it was really, really nice.
What's I'm really intrigued as to what the hell they're going to do to you the next day. But firstly, what does a moose steak taste like? I mean, could you be eating beef, or is there a distinct difference? And what is that?
It sort of has I would say it has a similar texture to beef, but it doesn't taste quite like beef, but it's absolutely delicious. It's very, very lean, but it was, I wouldn't say you'd have a huge amount of it on a plate, but it was it was, I don't know if the right saying is clean eating. It was really, really easy to eat. It was, as I say, the same texture as steak, but it had a slight gamey tone to it, but it was absolutely delicious. And you have that with sort of veg and potato, things like that. It was absolutely perfect.
So now you're all sustained for what's to come. You mentioned that you're using an estate rifle for this trip. So the next day, how do you get to grip? I mean, do you get to choose your own, or how do you get to grips with it and zero it? What happened the next day?
Well, Christopher bought the estate rifle. I can't quite remember what it was. I think off the top of my head, it was a 30-06, which I'm used to shooting anyway. It was important. We obviously go and zero the rifle, and I think the reality of it is zeroing. Yes, is to check the rifle is firing in the right direction and doing what it should be doing, but also for them to see that I'm capable and they're comfortable with me taking the shot. Because at the end of the day, they don't know me. I admittedly said to them, I'm new to this. I've shot deer, but I've not shot anything as big as a moose before. If one was to be injured, they need to be able to either take that rifle quickly from me, or be able to ensure that a safe second shot could be followed up to ensure that that animal is quickly and humanely dispatched. Because they're there whilst I'm there for the experience and to hunt moose and to see a different culture in hunting. They're also there to take part of their quota, and I've learned this over sort of 2 years going back and going hunting now. This year will be my 3rd trip hunting with the guys, and every time I go there, you learn the importance of what they've actually got to do. They're not there to just shoot anything. Like there's a deer management plan over here, there's a very strict management plan on moose in Norway. So the whole thing of me zeroing and working out how capable I am is a significant part of getting me ready, basically.
At any stage, did you question yourself? So you said that it's, a moose is a significantly larger animal than a deer. Was there any stage that you felt a touch of self-doubt?
I think if I said no, then I'd be lying. You always have a sort of, I personally always have a, right, okay, what if? And I think if you don't have a what if, you go there with the intention this is absolutely going to happen. If something doesn't go to plan, then you're not ready in your head to address the situation as and when it changes. Now, that I'm talking that from a perspective of as a novice. What would I do in that perspective of, even as a novice, I want to know, how I'd react. Do I dilly-dally, or if something goes wrong, I need to give that rifle as quickly as possible to Chris for him to rectify it if I'm not comfortable. My emotions and my well-being is of no concern at that point. The animal well-being is the most important part for me. So that's the only time I had a doubt, is will I know what to do if something goes wrong? But I think if you go in with the attitude of having a be confident, but also be confident of knowing what to do if something doesn't go right. And if it's as simple as passing the rifle to somebody more experienced, then so be it. The animal, as I say, is the most important part. But other than that, I felt very confident with the rifle. We'd zeroed, we got a good grouping on the shots. Also taking into consideration that the target that we're aiming on, a moose, is larger than it would be on a deer. So, all of these are sort of psychological things that I'm taking into consideration. So going out there, on the first morning, having zeroed and got kitted out, I had good confidence.
And with the ranges that you were zeroing at, what distances were those?
We zeroed, I think off the top of my head, it was about 100 yards and 150 yards. We don't want to be taking silly distance, longer shots than that. We could go up to 200, and that was the bounds of which I was comfortable with, and also that was the bounds in which Christopher was comfortable with me taking. So you go on the advice of the guide. There are people out there who will take longer shots, and that's their prerogative. They're more confident. It's an individual situation. But that's what we zeroed in at, and we had an understanding of what to do.
So on the rifle that you used from the estate, what scope did you have mounted on it?
Again, the estate rifle, I think it was actually another Leupold scope. That's why I'm with my setup now that I've got with Angela Merkel. I knew the kit. That's why I've gone for Leupold on that. Just coincidence. Yeah, it was just sort of very much a case of deal with the estate rifle there. So I don't have much to say.
So now you've got the confidence, you've got the kit. Do they give you a briefing about what to expect over the next few days, or is it just, okay, pack your stuff, we could be out for a while?
Again, down to Christopher and Anders' sense of humour, it was very much we're going up that hill, and that hill wasn't a hill, it was a mountain. It was steep, and I still have nightmares to this day about going up. Even when I was back there in September, I said, please tell me we're not going up Heart Attack Hill. It was horrible. It was one of those ones where I think it took about an hour to get up. The lads can do it in about 15 or 20 minutes. But they're like deer themselves. They can pop up and down these hills, whereas I'm sort of lugging a big gut about. So the first morning we got ready, we got kitted up, and we went out over. We took a different route in the first day, and to look at a set of valley that Christopher wanted us to have a look at. I mean, the first sort of half an hour, I knew that I was going to be up against it. It was going to be really tricky. The ground, it was very, very much like Scotland in that it was when I was in Kyrgyzstan, it was hard, rocky ground. You could push against it, you could put some resistance. But here, it was mossy, it was soggy, it was slippy. So your energy would just drain from your legs a lot quicker, and you'd be sinking, and you'd be really fighting against it. So you'd be really putting a shift in to get up these hills. When we got up to the top of the first valley, it was nice to just sit there, and you just all of a sudden this huge vista opens up, and you are in the most spectacular valley, looking at mountains. We're high up already, but the mountains across the lake in front of us were just another level. It was the best way to describe it. It was like something out of Lord of the Rings, just this very interesting mixture of topography and ground. And I was just there taking photos all the time. I absolutely loved it. And we spent about 40 minutes to an hour just glassing and looking on the far bank for moose. And I'd never seen any at this point. And having Christopher try to explain it to me was amazing. And we just spent, I think, as I say, 45 minutes to an hour just looking and trying to find what would essentially be a tiny needle in a haystack, because then you realize how big this valley is that we're actually in. We eventually find a couple of small groups, like a bull, a cow and a calf, or a cow and a calf, and it's then just a case of working out which one we're going to go for, which one Christopher wants to take for his quota. And also, it's not just a case with there of, okay, we'll go and shoot that one, because at that point you've got to also realize and take into consideration the logistics of getting it back. Whereas, which is something I've never experienced before. When you deer stalking in Scotland, you can either get an Arga cat to it, or you can drag it 9 times out of 10. Here, that was absolutely not possible. It was absolutely inaccessible.
So what was the plan when you shot a moose?
Well, the plan was hopefully shoot one close enough that we can get it back, drag it back. We actually went. We took a detour on the first day, and he wanted to have a look at another part where he knew which was good for another part of the estate he knew was good for moose, so through the valley that we'd come into. And it took us from this sort of hilly moorland type escarpment into more forestry area. The weather picked up, it was beautiful and sunny, and again just this sort of sheer contrast of topography and weather. And we got to this far bank, didn't see anything there, and then it was at that point we're absolutely exhausted because we'd walked and walked and walked. We'd probably been out 4 or 5 hours immediately of walking straight from the cabin. So we decided to have lunch, and that's where I discovered the Norwegians' love of rocket fuel or coffee, and their fantastic ability to build fires. So we sat in this really picturesque little woodland, and Christopher made a huge, I thought he was going to start a forest fire, a huge campfire, and he set the kettle up, the little sort of over the fire kettle, and we had coffee. I pretended I really enjoyed it. It was just I was wired after it, absolutely wired. I could have walked for another 3 days after that coffee. And we actually had lunch there, and I can't remember the name of the food, but they were like little ration packs, but they were a branded ration pack, but they came with all different types of meals in them, so beef stew or a hot pot or things like that, and they were absolutely delicious, but they were full of calories, which obviously really helped. And we just ended up sitting there and for an hour, 2 hours, just chatting away, and it became then not about finding moose, but just finding our feet, taking it at an easy pace, and realizing we've got 3 or 4 days to go. We'll find a moose at some point, but just enjoy it for what it was. And it was incredible to see all sorts of different wildlife. We saw quite a lot of black game there, so blackcock, and we didn't see any capercaillie, but they have got them on that estate, and a few hazel grouse and willow grouse. So it became a really nice sort of the start of a bonding exercise between Christopher and I.
When you were out around that campfire, was the plan to kind of go back every night to the cabins, or was it to stay out on the hills?
We sort of discussed it before I'd come out to Norway, but actually whilst we'd walked a long way, it was easier to just get back to the cabin every night, get changed, reassess, and also with it being the cabin in the middle of the site, we could change plan at a moment's notice. If we were in the valley and nothing was really happening, it would be a bit more of an effort to sort of rejig everything. So we ended up going back to the cabin every night.
In preparation for the amount of walking and climbing that you had to do, did you do any training or exercise beforehand, or did you just kind of work off this immense coffee and adrenaline rush?
Well, it was partly the latter, but no, I mean, I'm lucky because I live in the Peak District, so we've got some really good walks, and the dog obviously needs to get out quite a bit. So I spent quite a bit of time walking up Kinder Scout and through the Peak District there, but it was nothing really that I could plan for because I hadn't been there. And the second time round, I knew more what to expect and could train a little bit more for it. But I don't think it's something that the step machine in the gym could really prepare you for. And particularly the following days, you know, once you've had a few gin and tonics and a few wines and the famous aquavit, which is the spirit that we got quite merry on one night. Yeah, nothing in the gym can really quite prepare you for that baptism of fire.
What did you wear on your feet? Because you mentioned earlier that the terrain was very different to that of Kyrgyzstan. It was probably very different to the Peak District. Did you have boots, or did you have kind of longer welly type boots? I'm not sure what the right term is for those, but
personally, I've always worn boots. I always wear, and I absolutely swear by, my Brandykos boots. I've had Brandykos boots for probably 5-6 years now, maybe even a bit longer. And I've actually got about 5 pairs of them through the different range. And they're absolutely phenomenal boots. A lot of my friends wear them. They're super comfortable, extremely durable. But the interesting thing with them that we discovered, that the guys discovered, was I ended up having a brand new pair. I ordered a brand new pair of boots, and the guy sent it through to me. And I was really protective over them. I didn't want to get them scuffed or anything. I wanted them to look immaculate. So I didn't break them in. And I got them to the cabin, pulled them out, and the guys are like, they're immaculate, those boots. I'm like, I've not even worn them. I put them on, and they were like, you're gonna regret that. You should have broken them in. I put them on. The boots were flawless, so comfortable, and I was a bit nervous, to be honest, because I've had boots, you know, in the past where they haven't supported you properly, or until you've broken them in, they rub on you or things like that. But these are awesome. I won't wear anything else.
That's amazing. I was expecting you to say your feet were covered in zinc oxide tape and blisters after.
No, I mean, don't get me wrong. You know, after the amount of walking that we did, anyone's feet are going to ache after that. But those boots are world class, absolutely world class. And I've worn them in Kyrgyzstan. I've worn them in Norway. I've had them in Scotland. They're going to come with me to Greenland in March. They are the best.
I think that's a really good tip, and especially for people who are listening and you know, save their boots for best. You've got to be careful that the boots that you save for best are going to stand the test.
It was a foolish error on my part, but confidence in the kit. I knew those boots would be absolutely fine. I think the lads actually want a pair now, so I'm probably going to have to get them a pair.
So the next day, when you headed out again, because I guess you're only there for 3 or 4 days, did you feel any pressure, you know, today, that like almost like the time's counting down, that you need to find your moose, basically?
100%. Bearing in mind, this is the first sort of real big trip that I've ever done. You do feel the urge to have that sense of completion about you, and this I'm realizing now isn't the be all and end all. It's not that it's not a hunting trip if you're not successful. And actually, the first time we went there, I was like, I've got to complete this. I've got to do it. I've got to have something to prove for at the end of it. And that's the wrong attitude to have with it. I'm pleased to say I've reassessed that now. But it's the sort of the newbie, the naivety, and everybody gets that. So I did have this sort of, my God, I hope we find one. I hope we find one. And I knew Christopher wanted to find one for me, and Anders did as well. So they put a huge amount of effort in. But you know, taking into consideration, these are wild animals. You know, they're not in a pen. You've got to work for it. On what is essentially, I think it was the 3rd day, we'd gone into up Heart Attack Hill, which I really literally wanted to cry every time they said that we were going to go up there, because I think by the end of the trip we did it 4 times, and as I say, it's steep, it's boggy in parts, so you really and you're carrying a big weight on your back. So we go up Heart Attack Hill, we go out, we start glassing. And I think at this point, Anders spots a moose in the distance, and we're talking, I think, about 4K out. from where we were at this point. And the moose was up against the mountainside, sort of resting up. So we devised a plan. We ended up having lunch. We had a huge, I thought Christopher made big fires, but Anders, I ended up getting a photograph of it. It was like a bonfire. It was huge, and he goes and cuts down a tree, and it's all that for meatballs. And we're there with meatballs on sticks, on skewers fashioned from sticks. It was ace, real sort of Boy Scout type thing. More rocket fuel coffee, and we just sat there chatting and talking and then devising a plan on how we were going to approach hunting this particular moose. We set off in the early afternoon, up and around, rather than going obviously straight at it, checking that, we checked the wind. We ended up having to come around the back of the mountain, over the top, which took us about 2 hours, 3 hours to get to do. I'm dripping in sweat at this point, not wanting to give up because there's a chance of a moose here at this point. Thankfully, the water in the rivers and the little streams coming down is the freshest water I've ever drank. It's just unreal. So we just had a little bottle and we could just keep swigging. So we were plenty hydrated. But it was this sort of drive to, we've got to complete this, we've got to complete it. Christopher's got a radio, and he's radioing to Anders, who's way back at the lunch camp, glassing and spotting for us, and sort of giving us some assistance. And we're stalking around the back. And it's at this point we're well and truly exposed on the top of this mountain. I dump my bag, and we sort of scuttle across to roughly where this moose was, and we get into position, and it becomes a waiting game. We lay there, we're shuffling down, we're crawling. It's hard on the kit because it's all sort of granite rock that's been exposed, wind exposure, things like that. So it's scratching, and we get to a ledge and we just lie there, set the rifle up, and we're waiting. And we've got an idea where this moose is going to come out. Now we know it's a sort of a calf, sort of a yearling calf, or 2 years old, something like that. It is what they needed to take off the hill. So we're waiting to see roughly where she's going to come out, but we've got an idea. We can only hear little bits from the radio, so the full communication isn't coming through. So we'll lay here, and Christopher sort of, at this point, I understand his sense of humor, and he's sort of quietly winding me up and getting me all sort of excited for what's about to happen. Even he didn't know what was about to happen, because I'm lay there and you're looking through this scope, and your eyes going a bit funny, so you try and shake it off. And I'm lay there thinking, and then I clock something in the corner of my eye move, and I'm just thinking, holy shit. What had happened was this moose had come up on a false ledge, taken a completely different route to where we anticipated her coming from, and come up to a point, and I'm kicking in, and I can see her, and I'm looking at her. We reckon that she was 20 meters from us, maybe even and that's at a push, maybe even closer. And at this point, I'm there. She moves out a little bit. It's just bizarre. And I've got the rifle ready, because she's come up, and where she is, I can see where she's come up. The scope is actually on the perfect place. So we couldn't move back. It would disturb her. We couldn't go anywhere. If she moved on, we're not going to get a shot that's safe. This was literally the safest shot. So Christopher gives me the nudge. I shoot at sort of, by this point, she's about 20, 30 meters away, but not clocked where we are. And all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. She turns and runs. And at this point, going back to the point, what do we do if it goes wrong? If it goes wrong, I immediately gave Christopher the rifle, and he took 2 shots. He missed with the first and connected with the second. But she tears off down this hill, this very rocky sort of escarpment, and drops. And my heart is pounding at this point, because it's something that I wasn't expecting, and it's a prime example of something could happen that you're not anticipating. I'm sort of shaking at this moment. Christopher knows she's down, everything's good, because where he told me to shoot, I shot. I listened, and that's the most important thing. Listen to what you're being told. And he congratulates me. It's quite emotional because we're knackered at this point. We get down. Anders takes about an hour or so to get to us because from where he is, and we all convene at the Moose. Thankfully, by the time we come to preparing her and grallicking her and dressing her, field dressing her, my shot actually killed her. She was just running on adrenaline and steam. The shot was absolutely fine, even though it was close, and which was really reassuring for me to know. Christopher said, I just put the 2 insurance shots there for the reason that, it's the right thing to do. Many people wouldn't take a shot at that close. I'm happy I did it. I felt confident with it. It's one of those things. And I was listening off sound advice from somebody who knows what they're doing. And it came good. Then we start to prepare her, and I look at this female calf that we look, and it's like a cow. It's huge, and I've never seen anything so large in my life. I mean, the legs are like something out of a cartoon where you see like dinosaur bones. They're just very gangly things and absolutely massive. And so begins the preparation of her.
When you talk about the quota that they need to take, how did your team of guides decide on that one? How do they know which ones to take out and which ones to leave?
My understanding of that situation in Norway is very much down to the local area, and I think it's also governed quite heavily by the local authorities. So there's a lot of communication between estate owners, mutual estates, and hunting communities, and the quotas are issued, I think, by the government, and I think that is down to the size of the acreage of a piece of ground. I mean, I'll stand corrected if I'm not 100% with that. But there are certain things that they've got to shoot a percentage of every category. So a percentage of big bulls, a percentage of cows, and a percentage of calves. I don't want to go into the sort of science of it on too much in case I get it totally wrong. But what I was able to appreciate from there is that actually this is a really well organized, well constructed management plan that clearly is doing a huge amount of good. There's obviously a lot of moose on that estate because they can shoot a large number of moose over the course of the season. But equally, there's also heavy ramifications and penalties in the event that somebody does something wrong, which I think also shows the respect that the Norwegians have for their game. If somebody does something wrong, or it's not quite right, yes, it's tough, but the rules are there for a reason, and it seems to work.
What happened to the meat from that calf? You mentioned kind of grallicking in the field. How does it get transported back, and what's it used for, or how is it used?
How does it get transported back? On my back, on Christopher's back, and on Anders' back. You can't get Arga cats to where we were. We were probably 3 or 4 hours away from camp. So what we did was we prepared the moose, grallicked her, dragged her to an opening where it was much easier to get to. They piled a load of sticks on there and twigs and bushes to stop the birds from getting at it, and put a bit of a sort of orange cord there that flapped around again to stop the birds from getting there. We hiked back. This is why I was saying we did that route 4 times up Heart Hill, got back to the cabin, had lunch, and then the following morning we had to go and extract her. So we got there, again, another hike up. This time it was a lot quicker because we were going straight direct. We weren't stalking. We weren't cautious of disturbing anything. We butchered, skinned, and broke her up into more manageable chunks. And the lads had their huge rucksacks. in total, she was about, I think she was about 130 kilos, which is small for a moose, but for me, that was just colossal. So the lads had about 50 kilos each on their back. They were just machines. And all sort of piled up. And then I had about 30 kilos on mine. The skin alone, because I wanted to take the skin back and have it tanned as a sort of, as a sort of memento. And we rolled that up, and that is immensely heavy in itself. We rolled that up and put it on my back, and there's actually a drone footage somewhere of the three of us stood and the drone's panning around. And I love the drone footage because it's really sort of, it is just a cool shot. And then you notice on the back that the skin had dropped a little bit right in between my legs. And it just looked like a very dangly pear or something. And it's just completely ruined the whole shot. Yeah. So I can't watch that anymore without laughing. But then we carried everything back, and it was amazing how little is left. And the fascinating thing, both Anders and Christopher are incredibly intelligent guys. They're only young. They're only sort of my age, sort of 30s. They'll probably kill me if they're even probably younger than that. But they really, really know their stuff. And I was asking them to explain to me how they know how old this calf is. And they were able to sort of break down the jaw, show me the teeth, the new teeth coming through, how many sets of teeth it had. Everything about it was absolutely fascinating. And it just showed that these aren't guys that are just there to pull the trigger. They're there because they love what they do. They know a hell of a lot about it, and they know the benefit of what they're doing. And it was that learning that made the whole experience, that rounded the whole experience off. Plus, they're brilliant. They're just great friends. They've become really, really good friends.
With the moose skin, what was the process of getting that out of Norway? Did you have to get it tanned in Norway and then exported?
Unfortunately, the skin we never managed to get it through, because by the time that we'd got back and a few days had passed, we'd missed the opportunity. So the tanning process couldn't be done. So the hair started to fall out. So it unfortunately couldn't be used. We'll try and get it again, but it needed to be done a lot quicker. Getting things back, I think, is from Norway to the UK, I think is going to be quite tricky, and I think it's going to be increasingly more difficult with new proposed legislation for importing and exporting what the government perceive as trophies from certain countries anyway. So that can't really answer because I don't know at this moment in time, but I'm not envisaging it being the easiest, unfortunately.
You mentioned before that this whole trip was designed to mark your birthday. Was it on your birthday that you took the moose?
No, I took the moose on the 5th, I think, the day out, 5th of October. And then the 6th of October, we extracted it. I think I was there for 4 or 5 days in total. But the whole trip was around the 30th. So, I mean, most people make their birthday the last 3 or 4 days this day. So it's still I'm still classing it as my 30th birthday present, and it was epic. I wouldn't have it any other way. The only thing we didn't get to see, which I still haven't seen in the 3 trips I've done, is the Northern Lights. I was really hoping that we'd get to see them, but we did just get the most spectacular crystal clear nights, and you could just see everything like the Milky Way and the star. It was just absolutely stunning. So it was really, really a cool trip.
If somebody else wants to replicate the same moose hunts, who are the outfitters that you used, and how much should they expect to spend on a 4 or 5 day trip?
The outfitters I use are called Plahtes Estate, and I think it's spelled PLAH or PLATHES Estates in Norway. Or just get people to message me, and I'll introduce them to the guys there. It's the pricing. I'm waiting on this year's pricing now, but I'd set a few £1,000 aside for the trip, and it all depends on if you're going to go for a bull moose, they will offer these trips of if people want to shoot a bull moose or they want to do a cull animal, those packages are open. So it's something to talk to the estate. But a couple of £1,000, £3,000, would be a good starting point, and then take it from there. But it just depends on what else you want to do as well. There's the option of the wing shooting out there. This year I went back in 2022, and this trip, I went back as friends. I got roped in, I got stuck in a lot more this time. The lads were relentless on their banter with me, which I absolutely love them for. And I ended up shooting hazel grouse last year, which was just really, really interesting and something completely different. Yeah, this year I'm going to we're going to go to a different part of the estate and hopefully try for a moose again, because in 22 when I went back, I went there early November this year, so a bit later. We actually tried. We didn't go on a mountain hunt. We went more traditional. We went to shoot a moose over baying dog. Christopher and Anders both have Norwegian, I think they're called Norwegian elk hounds or moose hounds. They're the most awesome looking dogs, and they're so lovely. And their job is to track the moose, find the moose, and hold the moose at bay until you get up to the moose and you can spot it and shoot it. And it's another way of hunting. And that was part of the journey that I'm having with these guys in Norway, about learning about different techniques and things like that. Last year wasn't successful in the sense that we didn't shoot a moose, but it was just so much more of an experience and a learning curve. Everything from shooting hazel grouse to seeing different parts of the estate, all the way to drinking kosk, which is a new homebrew. So hunting and homebrew, as we said in the last one, where it was this year, it became kosk, which is black coffee. And the first time we did it was really strong black coffee and vodka, which was okay. And then the second night, because we had to come out of the valley, which was the driveway sort of half an hour down the track, Chris popped into his friends who makes his own spirit, and we tried kosk that way, and that's the traditional way, and that was 86%.
It's good you've still got your eyesight.
Oh, it was nuts. It was absolutely nuts. I slept like a log that night. It was just hellish. You put a little tiny bit in, and you put a matcha, and it was like petrol.
Wow. So I think we need to potentially share the recipe for kosk in the link to this podcast if anyone's interested.
Or find it. I have to double check whether it would be legal in this country at that percentage. It was like absinthe and coffee. It was just nuts, but really strong absinthe. And I think sometimes they even go into the 90%. Wow.
I mean, you're going to have dreams about moose chasing you with that kind of percentage.
I think I did, to be honest. I was hallucinating moose.
Gosh. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Intrepid Hunter. Where are we going next episode?
Next episode, we're going to go to Eastern Germany, and we're going to be hunting mouflon.
Fabulous. I can't wait. And for any listeners, you can find out more about the kit that Nathan uses, and you can follow his journey by subscribing to this podcast, by following Viking Arms Limited on YouTube, or by having a look at the latest news on vikingshoot.com. Thank you for listening.